down through history a scale with his name. This is slightly unfair because he probably did not come to it on his own. He probably came to it by either visiting Egypt or somewhere in the Near East and having it transmitted from Babylon. So there are Babylonian tablets now that show exactly Pythagoras tuning and the system of modes, which I mentioned a minute ago, that's going to be very important moving into Plato. So anyway, I mean, we call it Pythagorean. People still today refer to it as Pythagorean. He's probably not the one who came up with it. He might not even be the one who came up with the Pythagorean theorem. It's hard to say. He probably gleaned insights from his travels and then was able to synthesize it and put it in a style of proof that fit the historical context that he was in. And it's clear, though, that he shaped and molded these insights into his own spiritual, religious view. So there is definitely something unique and original to this Pythagorean worldview and his use of these understandings from mathematics, but it's not clear that he actually was the one who came up with them. Anyway, the one really big insight that Pythagoras provides is we can tune a lyre or a ulos by using what is called a series of fifths. Now, we looked at a fifth last module. It is a very consonant interval. It has the ratio of 3:2. So if this wave is vibrating 2 times per second, it's going much faster, but just as an example, this one is going 3 times per second. So they're doing something like that, right? And the two notes, because they link up every once in a while, have a very consonant sound together. And so Pythagoras, I mean, if he didn't discover it, he at least was the first in Greece to understand this and to be able to explain it to other people. That there was actually a mathematical aspect underpinning the sonic phenomenon. So in Pythagorean tuning, we tune a fifth by ear, and then we can tune a fifth again above that one, and then we cycle through and continually tune by ear that perfect fifth. So that sounds like this. Each of those intervals has the same value based on relative to it, what comes above it. But this opens a can of worms that doesn't really get solved until basically the 18th century. And you might think, why does that create a problem? Well, within harmony, there is a sort of drift, a sort of dissonance, a sort of disagreeability baked into the very structure of it, baked into the very mathematics of it. If we follow this series of fifths through, you get the 12-note scale, which is our piano, but tuned slightly different. So each of those intervals is going to be the same, but once we do 12 of those intervals in a row, the last one, the 13th interval that comes back to the original note, and it does, basically line up back with the original note, that last interval will actually slightly surpass the original note. Only slightly, though, a very dissonant amount. And so in order to use this Pythagorean tuning and maintain the octave, the identity of a note twice the first note, that last fifth, that last interval in the chain is going to have to be detuned by a significant degree, 23.4 cents. It's a very noticeable interval. It's called the Wolf interval. And that creates an extremely dissonant sound. It sounds like this. And Pythagoras, he uses this tuning system, and for the most part, when we're playing a melody in this tuning system, we're never going to hear that interval. But it's baked into it, and as a musician explores this tuning and uses it in different keys and tries to really be expressive with it, eventually they're going to come to that interval. And that interval is extremely dissonant. So we can think about this in terms of a spiral, and I have this diagram that shows this, that basically in our system you can move in a perfect circle of fifths because we detune each fifth by 2 cents. And if each is detuned by 2 cents, which is barely audible, you can really, I'm not even going to show you an example because it would be so difficult to hear. But if you do each one by that little tiny bit, 2 cents, well, that all adds up to about 24 cents after 12, and you get back to the octave. So we're in the clear, and that's called 12-tone equal temperament. So that's the way of solving Pythagoras tuning, but when I say solving, I mean a compromise. We don't have a pure fifth. We don't use the pure fifth that Pythagoras and mathematics and harmony and the harmonic series all show us to be the most harmonic, the most pure, where the notes perfectly line up with each other. Ours is a little bit off, and there's a kind of like slight vibration there, a slight lack of resonance, but we are accustomed to it. And this problem of Pythagoras, this stacking of fifths in order to make scales, this is a problem of tuning, right? Because in pure harmony, in the harmonic series, we're not playing multiple notes. We just have all of these notes that are included within each note. But once we want to play multiple notes together, we have to tune them. And when we do that, we run into these kinds of problems that the notes, when stacked, spiral out in the fifth. And when we want to include the pure major third, we have the opposite problem. It actually spirals into itself. What do I mean is that when we do the circle of fifths, we get a note that is higher than the original pitch when we finish the circle. But when we do a circle of major thirds, we get a pitch that's lower than the initial starting pitch. And it becomes very dissonant very fast. Again, I have a diagram of this that shows this very well. So that first interval is a pure third. The second one is again a pure third. That one is another third, but when you stack 3/3 that way, you've already gotten back to your initial note, but that initial note is slightly flat. It's detuned. So if we want to use just intervals, if we want to use these pure intervals, we have two spirals going in opposite directions, making it such that if we want to be able to play all of these intervals, we're going to need an instrument that has upwards of 500 keys on it. So instead of a piano, which has 88 keys, we're going to need hundreds of keys in order to be able to play each of those spirals. So if I start on one note, again, there's 12 notes in our 12-tone equal temperament. The pure harmonics are based on that note, and the note next to it has its own spiraling out notes. So each note would technically require its own whole series of harmonics. So the big takeaway from this is that every tuning system is a compromise. And I really want us to realize here that our tuning system, which we're going to look at more as we go on, and we're all used to it because we've heard it so much, but there are major compromises within that system. It is not equivalent to the just intervals of harmonics, of real harmony. These mathematical numbers that are behind the music aren't just some abstract thing that we're talking about. It's actually the way that the sounds vibrate. And when you play a note on the piano, all of those overtones are there and audible. They're moving around as the note unfolds. And so in our tuning system, there is this fundamental antagonism between different intervals, and every tuning system is a compromise. The real beauty of Pythagoras, again, is his ability to take these mathematical insights, these insights about the abstract and the rational, and to be able to harmonize them with the mystical, the experiential, the felt, right? We don't have this divide in Pythagorean philosophy and Pythagorean musicology or cosmology between rationalism and materialism. They're together. In some ways, the Pythagoreans are materialists, and in some ways, the Pythagoreans are idealists. And they sort of seamlessly combine these things. It's rather impressive. And I would also just mention that the Pythagoreans were fairly progressive for their time in ancient Greece around the classical period. In the early classical period, misogyny had become widespread, and this was plaguing Athens and so many other Greek cities that even in Athens, women could not be within public areas. They could not take positions of power. They could not even own property. They were forced to veil when in public, and overall just very mistreated. So misogyny was this huge problem across Greece, and women were precluded from education. And the Pythagoreans went strongly against this. There are many accounts of Pythagorean women and the women who were studying and developing ideas within Pythagorean philosophy. So we see this come back with Plato. Plato in the Republic says that women should be able to rule, women should be given the education of men, all of these kinds of things. Women should even be allowed to fight in wars and things like that. So Plato is following the Pythagoreans on this dismantling of the legal system around patriarchy and misogyny.